Okay, I'm throwing a little video together here. This is how to grow tomatoes in pots in the South. And, I've been experimenting with this for a few years now, and I think I got a system that's working really, really good. I'm making this video because it's really hard to find information on potted tomatoes, especially in the South. And what I find is that people are basically telling you you have to grow dwarf varieties and keep the plants small and all that kind of stuff. And well, I figure there had to be a way. If you're in my situation, I'm currently having the rent and I can't dig into my landlord's property, so I wanted to find a way to make fresh tomatoes. And I think I figured it out. Each year I'm going to refine it. So if you're interested in this, I encourage you to keep up with the channel because I'm going to be a lot more detail orientated when I do it next season. Now that I know I have something that works. So this is unscripted. So sorry if I bobble around a little bit, but let's go ahead and get started. Okay. Now the key to doing this is the fertilizers. Now let me back up here. Okay. I'm originally from the north. We don't have to even try to grow tomatoes up there. We have that fertile glacier soil. We don't get too hot. We get just the right amount of rain and not too much rain. Well, depending on where you are. I'm from the Chicago area. I guess Seattle will get too much rain, but you get the drift. I moved down here, and initially I did have a house, and I was growing them in the ground, and I wasn't having much luck. And what I did out there is what I always did in the north, which is basically massaging like a dozen bags of cow manure and some mushroom compost and mix all that up. And then, I've always been a fan of the Epsom salt. I'd put a tablespoon in where I made my little hole for the plant. And I'd drop the Epsom in there, and I'd put a little peat moss in the hole, which let me back up. I would mix peat moss into my garden soil. Not quite 12 bags, but a decent amount. And then I'd always put a bunch of peat moss around the base of my tomato plant. And it worked fine. Giant tomato plants, tons of tomatoes. And I moved down to the South. I'm an Air Force transplant. And all of a sudden, I couldn't get tomatoes to grow. I had these little anemic looking little things that didn't want to grow fruits. And then it got even worse when I exited the Air Force and I had some political issues that made me have to sell my house. And I had to come up with another way to grow tomatoes because if you're like me, you love a garden grown tomato. I mean, you can't beat it. So this is basically what I came up with. First, the correct soil, which if people get real technical about pHs, and usually you got to send that out for analysis because it's expensive. I'm not going to get all into the pH. What I'm going to use, and granted some of this is going to cost a little bit of money, unless if you figure out a way to do similar things cheaper. I use a potted soil, and I'm going to go over that after I go over the fertilizer. But basically, here's the trick that I found, okay? Last year I used Miracle-Gro, and what I got was this really, really good early growth with my plants, but then it was like nothing happened. And it was kind of a bummer. Like you start out, the first couple of months are good. Then you get to July and it's like, where's the fruit? Where's the fruit? And then all of a sudden you get into your season where it's too hot and they just don't want to grow. I guess I'll add in for anybody newer to this. The way they generally do it in the South is they do determinate plants. That basically they grow generally fast, they make all their fruit and then they die. And the goal is to try to do that around the beginning to mid-July before we get the painful scorching summer heat, which is too much for tomatoes. Basically, once it gets too hot, they will just stunt. They will stop growing fruit or they will grow very slow and you just get to a point where the production yield is not worth it if you're a commercial farmer. So here's what I figured out. Quick note to yourself. When you start Googling various fertilizers, don't be shocked if all of a sudden you start getting watched or anything goofy happens depending on how much you Google. Some of this stuff's a little hard to get, and that's because the government doesn't want you making bombs with it. So if you do start doing that, don't do anything stupid for the next few months. Hey, Will, I think Sean for Big Blocks might be trying to make a bomb. Shit, B, how do you do? We used the Patriot Act to monitor his web browsing with Red Flag AI. He didn't use Google, but that was okay because we have all the bases covered. Damn, Tommy, you a sly mofo. I know. And now we will use the COVID contact tracing to see if he is visiting other questionable people and if he has been observing any points of interest, such as skyscrapers or national monuments. That's a big operation, B. Who pays for it all? The track do, you silly little bee. Kind of like shooting themselves in the foot. But it's all good as long as they're good, law-abiding American citizens. But Sean for Big Blocks will probably check out fine. We brought him into the Cambridge group and then the Air Force after he hacked the Pentagon in 1992. Start off with your Miracle-Gro or something similar. Now you're getting your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and your potassium, right? Nitrogen, that's your greenie, your meanie greenie. You feed it nitrogen and that's going to make them grow like crazy. You'll be pruning every other day. They love that nitrogen. The higher the number nitrogen, the better. And I may even experiment with some other stuff other than Miracle-Gro. But it's nice to go with stuff that's readily available. Then you have your phosphorus. What that does is that promotes the flowers, the yellow flowers that bud that turn into the tomatoes. So you want to have a lot of early growth, a little dab of phosphorus so that when the flowers come they have a little bit of food and stimulant. And then you got the potassium. That is what's going to really make your tomatoes do really, really well. That's the important one right there, okay? So here's what I do. I do all Miracle-Gro, okay? And in the beginning, I use the big end of the Miracle-Gro scooper, which it doesn't look like they give an amount. But I use the big end, and once a week, I pick Sundays, I go ahead and I mix that into water, okay? And I just have a distilled water container that I covered up with tape, right fertilizer mixer right over the old label. This is a Walmart gallon. And then I fill the water up to about here, and I'll show you the mixture I use. The reason you don't want to use too much water is because the plants drain. And when they drain, they take a lot of the nutrients out with them. When you put that initial half a gallon or so in, you want that to at least have one good night where it just sits in there all night, all in the morning until it gets hot, and really let the root system absorb that without it all wanting to dribble out of your container. Okay? So, like I said, I do that with just the Miracle-Gro for about, until I just start seeing flowers, which I want to say is that maybe roughly going to be June-ish. And it depends on stunting. We'll get into that in a minute too, okay? Once I see flowers, I switch to this master blend, okay? Now, I still like the nitrogen because personally I'm trying to do inner determinants that grow all season so I keep getting tomatoes. I'm not trying to make money. I want my friends and family to have tomatoes basically all summer long. So I want something that's going to keep producing. So I still use the Miracle-Gro, but I use the little scooper. And then I use this stuff called Master Blend. Big shout out to, oh boy, what's his name? Real Farmer on YouTube. I couldn't find much potted information, but I figured whoever in the South is playing with stuff in the ground, I could probably port it over to my pots. Port the system over in my own little way and fashion. Now, granted, he's got a drip system that continuously drips. Let me actually link his video now. I link that because he's been very helpful. You'll find that a lot of these farmers are proprietary. They don't want to give you their information. That other guy, man, he's cool. He lets it out. He even has some people in the comments that get mad at him for letting out industry secrets. But at any rate, bam. There's the secret. This Master Blend International. And it is not something you can buy in the stores, at least not in most areas. And what makes this so great is that you're lowering the nitrogen to 4, because at this point you want to start focusing on fruit growth or vegetable growth. If you want to get into that debate if it's a fruit or a vegetable. You want to amp up your phosphorus to really make those flowers bloom, and to make those flowers bloom and have the right food. And then once those flowers turn into little tomatoes, you want to smack it hard with the potassium. Look at that, 38 versus 16 for the Miracle-Gro. That's a gigantic difference. And then, because I'm doing interdeterminants, I still put that little pinch of Miracle-Gro to give that little extra nitrogen to support that they keep growing, especially because of how I do my pruning process. But at any rate, I've had pretty good luck with this. Now back to issues. The main issue you have in the South is that we plant pretty early, almost like in March, because it gets so warm and it gets us a nice jump on the season. Excuse me. You want to plant as early as possible because you want to try to get your tomatoes going good before that dreaded southern heat kicks in. You know, that same heat that makes everybody go hide inside makes your plants want to shrivel up and die, or at least not produce. They just kind of hunker down like there's a tornado and they're hunkered in the corner hiding. But I did so. And I had a first really good 2 or 3 weeks, and then we got a late frost. Well, it wasn't a frost. I take it back. We had a frost, and I carried all my tomato plants in because a frost kills them. You can't hit 32 degrees with a frost and the moisture in there. They die. Brought them inside. All was good. Then it got warm for a few days. Brought them outside. Back outside. And then we dropped below, I believe it was 50. Okay, 50 is the magic number. It will not kill your tomato plants, but when they hit 50 degrees, it not only stunts them, but it puts them into a 2-week stunt. A 1 to 2 week stunt, depending on how bad it is, where they literally go dormant and they will not grow. And then that few weeks goes by, they kind of perk back up, and then they start doing well, but it's like you lost 2 weeks of your season. So next year, and what I suggest you do, rather than have them in the pots, which are heavy, and if you got 10 pots like me, it's a pain to bring them into your living room. Plus, I'm getting older, so I just don't like doing stuff like that like I used to. What I suggest that you do, get those biodegradable brown little plant containers. I'll post them now. Plant them in there, and then when you get into like mid-April, when you know there's not going to be any temperatures below 60, plant that into the pots. So that's what I would do differently. and we'll go over how we're going to plant them in the pots in a little bit. Okay, so let's get on to the fertilizer. You're going to want to pick up a scale. Mine's actually a numismatic scale. That's what it was listed as because I collect coins. And you can use this to figure out different things of coins, like pennies, for example. A pre-83 penny is going to be have a lot more copper content and way more than a newer penny that has more zinc. I know, too much information. And yes, 82 is a hybrid. Some were more zinc, some were more copper. But at any rate, if you look that up, and I wrote the word down, that's an easy way to find these scales that go down and do these grams, okay? And sometimes they're cheaper than getting something that maybe, you know, if it's going to say like fertilizer scale, they may charge more because they know that you don't know where to look. But these are extremely common in the coin collecting community, and it makes the price go down because there's a little more supply. So at any rate, here's the one I use. It's got a clear case that covers the top. It comes in this Zippo style secondary case, which I guess left-handedly I don't want to open very easily. And here's the box. Mine has worked absolutely fine. I recommend it, but basically anything that goes down the grams, and they didn't even label the box. This stuff comes out of China usually. I think I paid like $5 for it. I don't know. I've had this one for probably 5 years. So at any rate, there's my scale. And I'm going to show you how we do this, but basically what I'm going to do, my Miracle Grow, I'll do last because I'm not measuring it. I'm just putting it flush to here. But my Master Blend, we want 2 grams. Okay? Epsom salt, we want 1 gram. We're going to put 2 grams of Master Blend, 1 gram of Epsom. Then we're going to use this small size. Mind you, I'm showing you for after you're already getting flowers and getting fruits. And then you're going to use a funnel and come up with some type of contraption to mix it. This works really good. Like I said, you put the water up to about here, you cap it, and you can shake it up and mix it, and you're going to do one of those for each plant once a week. Okay? If you try to go 2 weeks, and I've played with this, they just start getting nutrient deficient because after 2 weeks of watering, you've pretty much flushed out your nutrients. I use it once a week with the ratios I'm supplying you, and knock on wood, I've burnt nothing out. Okay? Also, and I think next year I'm going to test half my plants with once a week. I've been using this twice a week. Calcium nitrate. Another thing that's not super easy to find. Notice how it's got a ton of calcium, okay? Not only does this keep your blossom end rot from happening, but it's going to limit the cracking because it's going to make this exterior wall of this tomato a lot tougher, and it just becomes more crack resistant, which granted, it doesn't hurt to have crack resistant species down here, okay? But yeah, when I add that to each pot, I put about a full scoop. I go ahead and use this same scooper, and you sprinkle it around the plant, trying to keep it a couple inches from the stalk, from the stem, because this stuff can burn out if it's too close before it absorbs. But I've had very good luck with that, and I started that later in the season when I started getting the blossom end rot, because I wanted to try it without it first and just see if my soil had good calcium and, you know, if I was going to get lucky, and I didn't. My first couple tomatoes basically looked like that. Within days of using this stuff, that problem was solved. All the new ones were good. They did really, really good. I had 1 week where I skipped after the 2 weeks, and I forgot to use this stuff, and it started coming back. But then towards the end of 2 weeks, sometimes I get new blossoms, and they start to have it a little bit. So I really think I'm going to I want to do half my plants. I don't want to burn them out and kill them. But next summer, I'm going to do half my plants. And like I said, I'm going to be a lot better about posting weekly updates so you can kind of see how it goes. Okay? So let's go ahead and mix some of this mixer in. Okay, so how I do the mixer. Again, in the early days, no scale needed. I'm just doing a big scoop, putting it in there, doing it once a week for each plant, okay? Start getting flowers. Switch over. Master blend, Epsom, little scoop of Miracle Grow. So let's get this started. If you've never used this type of scale before, you have something called a tare weight. Basically, if you turn it on and it says 0, and then you add something, it's going to add weight. What you want to do is turn it on with that already on there. It's hard to see that, so that the meter zeroes out. Here's your first obstacle. You want something really light. This just so happens to be, garbage that I kept. I believe it was a Halloween pumpkin light for a jack-o'-lantern. And I saw it and thought, hey, that's perfect. But you want something very, very light that you can use to do your mixing so that you're not really having that. Like, this is 0.04 of a gram. It's very, very light. Well, I probably should reset that. 4 grams. That makes more sense. So you want something pretty light. And it all depends on your scale. I mean, if you go down to 1 gram and you go really high, you could probably use a glass one or something like that. It all depends on your system. I'm just showing you what I'm currently using. Okay. Now, once I get that, let me go ahead and reset this again. With it already on there and I hit the button, that resets it also. I'm going to go into my master blend. This is where a tripod would have probably been nice. A whole scoop is a little bit too much. So what I do, I just give it the old tap until I get up to 2. And if you don't want to buy a scale, there you go. That's about how much is still left in there. This stuff goes a long way. Go ahead and dump this back in the bag. Oh, I got to unziplock my Epsom. Notice I double bag these to try to keep the humidity out. Now already, get a scoop of Epsom. And what I want to do is put 1 gram. Mind you, after a whole season of using Epsom salts, your soil, in theory, it could get, I'm a little bit over, but that's close enough. When you're doing it on camera, I guess you're a little sloppy. You can have your soil get saturated with salts, which is a bigger deal if you're doing it in a garden and you got to flush it out. Me personally, I'm going to use fresh soil every year, and because of how the pots drain, the pots are draining out a lot of that, and it may not even be a problem. I'd say especially if October, November, and mind you, in the South, we don't have freezing weather then, generally. I can just go out every day and keep flushing my soil and then start over if I didn't want to keep buying new soil, because that stuff does get expensive. Okay, so I got that. Then your Miracle Grow, I believe it came in 4 cylindrical pre-bagged quantities. And I'm still on my first one. It goes a long way. I'm almost out, but I just put it in a secondary bag here. So let me get a scoop out of there. Had to put you on pause. That one was hard to one-handed. So I got a generous little scoop. Now I got to hit power on my scale because it already auto-timed off. It's going to zero out again. But just to give you an idea of roughly how much that is, just under 2. So this is definitely much lighter of a product than the Master Blend. And I think the Master Blend's got all good stuff. Miracle Grow generally has a reputation, from what I've read, of having a lot of bullshit additives and fillers. Kind of like when you get whey protein, you can get the good stuff and the bad stuff. But at any rate, we got it, okay? So now, let's see if I can do this without making a complete mess. Go ahead and get your funnel going. That didn't work good with the camera. And then I'm going to take my finger off camera and just kind of brush some of that off. Alrighty, pardon the mess. Getting close to Halloween. We bought cups because I'm a Halloween fan. But at any rate, I got kind of a weird attachment. This is for a python. It's how I fill my aquariums and flush my aquariums, which will be probably a separate video I have yet to make. I have a lot of hobbies. But at any rate, that fits perfectly. You're going to want to figure out a way. Basically, get some cold water in there. Fill it up roughly to that line, which I'm just covering up the little label that comes again on the Walmart water. Now, if you don't use the Miracle Grow, this will have a yellowish tint. Miracle Grow's got quite a brilliant blue tint, but when you mix the two, you get what's almost like a green. But like I said, I've been doing this, and knock on wood, get my cap. Knock on wood, other than my plants getting stunted when it went below 60, things did really, really good. I've even had a couple occasions where we couldn't water for a few days, which is really not good with plants. And they still pulled through, and they're still going. There you go. Alrighty, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm much easier without the camera. I'm going to just start pouring this around. You could tell in theory you need to add a little soil because of the roots on this one, but it's getting late enough in the year that I'm getting a little bit lazy. But make sure you saturate those pretty good. I like to go all around, and then I just kind of, earlier in the season, your soil may not be compacted enough. If you do this, you'll make a hole. You got to be a little more gentle, or maybe even use, like a dedicated, what do you call it, with a spigot or whatever. But I'm getting late in the season and my soil's starting to get compacted. Which, granted, early on in the season, you do not want compacted soil. But I'm going to go ahead and do that to all the rest of my plants, okay? And that's basically it. That's what I've been doing. So I'm in Arkansas. I'm in Hot Springs, Arkansas, okay? We've been having really hot, really dry. And as you can see, my plants, even though now they're looking like crap, that's still pretty good. Everybody I know has already trashed out and thrown out their plants. But as you can see, mine are doing pretty good. I mean, at one point before they started sagging and stuff, I mean, I was getting close to 9 feet, 10 feet. I mean, they're tall. I don't know if you can... This one was my tallest, but then we had a storm and it had bent it over. basically, as you can see, that right there is at least 8 feet. If I stretched it out straight, it's at least 9 feet. And that's growing out of a pot, okay? Exactly what they say you can't do. Put my hand in for reference. Not a huge pot. Granted, I got a lead on some bigger pots that I'm going to try, but I'm proud to have done this with a pot. Now you can tell I'm pretty pruned up, okay? And what I've noticed with doing this with my plants is that, okay, early in the season, you definitely want to kind of prune and you want to get suckers. If you don't know about pruning and suckers, look up videos on that. Plenty of videos on that. I'm not going to cover that. Maybe next year when I do it week by week, but not right now. But you want to keep them pruned. And then also what I did was, as it started getting hot, mainly in August, some of that early growth starts dying off. Kind of like how those are starting to go, okay? And it's hard to know if it's getting a disease or if it's just, you know, age. I think it's more age because usually the diseases tend to cycle through pretty quick. But as that happens, I just prune them up, okay? Plus, I tend to see less growth lower. Like, for example, this was a nice big cluster. We had 4 or 5 good-sized tomatoes, okay? But it's like once you do that, they don't seem to want to grow back from this point, okay? So I'm pruned up to about, the top of my stomach. But as you can see, we still got plenty of plant, okay? My wife picked recently, so we don't have a whole lot to show. Now I don't have, there's a red one hiding. These are early girls. I always lately, for the last few years, I do a set of early girls to try to get something early. And that's my first 4. I said I had 10 plants. I think I got 8. My bad. And then these, and we had a bad storm the other night that folded this one over. These are Arkansas Traveler 78s, which are supposed to be designed by Arkansas State University to be ideal for growing in Arkansas, except for nobody grows them out here. I just, you know, being an Arkansan of 15 years, I'm kind of partial to them. But they did pretty good. They just neither get huge. You know, these are more like a Bradley County tomato. They get like that pink color. Whereas you get that true red out of the early girls. But I mean, I'd say the largest baseball size. So next year, I think now that I got a good system, I'm going to expand a little bit. There you go. See, I'm getting right to the end on my fertilizing, and that one's just starting to get a little bit of a stress crack. Granted, it could be I left it too long, but in my opinion, the longer you leave these, the better. I leave them until they physically start looking like something's starting to go bad, and I just think they taste better that way. See, now I'm getting a little bit smaller because these have all grown in the mass heat, when in theory they shouldn't grow at all. But I think between watering and good fertilizer, I'm still getting something, and that's the key thing. Even though I'm not getting the nice tomatoes I was getting a few months ago, I'm getting something, you know. And I'd say at this point we're getting probably 8 this size a week, and that's, you know, that was late August, early September Arkansas heat, which is brutal, especially because in Arkansas we got crazy humidity. It's usually over 90%. Which is something I want to address because, you know, the title of this is How to Grow Tomatoes in the South. I'm in the South, and it's, you know, like the Bible Belt area where you got all the humidity. You may be in an area in the South more like Texas where they don't get humidity, which not only is a lot more pleasant of a heat for humans, but I wonder if that tends to suck the water out of your plants, out of your planters. So you may want to watch that more closely. But what I basically do, I come out and I get the soil nice and moist. I don't want too much overflowing. As a matter of fact, I don't think these are ideal pots for tomatoes because they outflow too much. I think you'd be better off putting a few holes around it. But, you know, I don't soak them, but I get the soil saturated. You don't want mud, but you want it always moist if possible. And I just do that once every morning, about 6, 7 in the morning, and I let that ride all day. Now, a couple of times when we were, 105, 106 degrees, I came out and did it a second time. I'd do it right as the sun was going down. Now, even though tomatoes generally, don't go through water at night, because, it's that, what do you call it? Is it respiration? As they suck up the water and it basically, lets it out of it evaporates it out of the leaves, but that kind of gives you an idea. So again, this was, not really pre-planned. I just wanted to kind of throw this together because I don't know how many days these are going to last. We actually had one early morning that got below 60, and you could tell they still look good, but they don't look quite as good. They're actually perking up better because that's been about 3 or 4 days, but I didn't want a chance that I was going to lose them because we get some weird weather in the next few days. And I thought, September 15, I'm proud. I still got tomatoes going in the south, in pots, 8 feet, 9 feet tall on some of them. Like even those, you can't tell, but they're all, they're long. Oh, that's what I wanted to show you. The system I started going with this year, these two were like monsters, okay? Probably just because of the corner they're on, they catch a little bit more of that afternoon sun. But what I did was I bought 2 stakes. I got these little skinny ones from Lowe's, pounded it in. Then I took the bigger one, and I didn't pound it in, but I zip tied it, and that got me about a 6 foot, probably about a 6 foot, 6.5 foot stake, which initially I thought would be plenty. But at one point, this plant was almost to the top of that shutter, okay? And I did that on these 2, and then I got a little tight on money. We're still in that COVID season crap. So I just kind of started rigging them with zip ties on my shutters, which of course I don't have shutters over here, so those kind of... But that's an expensive route. That's $16 a piece, so I spent $32. I think I'd be better off building something out of a 2x4 and then putting like eyelet hooks and then using string to tie off the eyelet hooks. That would probably save me a lot more money. I could even probably move this second one over to the end and then take this, maybe buy a couple more and zip tie them to get it up to about 8 feet. And then I could go with, what do you call it? Is it the Florida weave? And, try to use string to hold them. I don't know. Next year is going to be interesting because now that I know what works, now it's going to be fine tuning. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to go over that. Okay, so I told you that we would talk pot and soil. I like this stuff. Again, it's a little bit costly. There's cheaper ways. In the future, when I have time, I want to get into composting and all that stuff. There's some real good videos on that, so I'm not going to take the time to do it until I actually do it. Maybe I'll throw in a few links of ones that I found interesting. I would also like to get a gutter. Yes, it's a mobile home. Life's been rough the last few years. I'd like to get a gutter on there in a 55-gallon container that I would put on the corner, that I would like make a shelf so that I could have like a little hose spigot connected to it, and I would like to use rainwater. That would be much more preferable. Because right now you got chlorine and chloramine in drinking water, which is also an issue for my fish tanks. That's a separate YouTube video. But ideally, the chlorine used to only take like a day or so to, you know, dissipate if you let water sit. And that's years ago how we used to do it for fish tanks. You know, you'd get your buckets, fill them with water, you'd let them sit for a day. Well, then they decided to use chloramine because it lasted longer, but that takes 3 days. So I have a feeling it doesn't hurt the plants, but I bet they would taste better if they were never getting chlorine and chloramine and or whatever in the water supply. Not that these tasted bad. They actually tasted really good. But that's just a future plan. So something that I would recommend you do, you know, plumb in a system like that. I want a slice of B-roll in here on watering. Basically, being in a mobile home, single wide, I got one spigot. So rather than spend the time and money putting in other spigots, I just run a T, run that to the front, and that's the main hose we use for washing cars, etc. And I've dedicated my rear unit just for the tomato plants. And what I mean by that is to make it convenient for watering. I leave this out, and I took a piece of PVC, not this one. That's the drain for my tanks in my aquarium room. Put a regular shutoff valve, and then put this 90-degree PVC, okay? And the way I do it, I kick it out, and I always have, can't see it with the tomato plants, no, it's my electric. I always have the spigot preset. Nobody touches that. So all I have to do is open this up. It explodes at first. And then I can control exactly how much pressure. And I can stand and I can water them without getting all the leaves soaking wet, which tends to add to disease factors. I don't have to bend my back. And that kind of gives you an idea. Just a tip. There's a million and one ways to water, but that's how I do it. And then I just work my way down. Just like that. When I'm done, it tucks away. And the plan was not only efficiency, but maybe get the family to contribute to watering every now and then. That didn't work. But it makes it easier for me. But at any rate, you can get this at all the big box stores, Lowe's, Walmart. This potting mix is what I'm having very good success with. Now let me tell you where I messed up. The last few years I used gardening mix because that's what I was used to using when I did in-ground gardens. Yeah, you know, I said mushroom compost and cow manure. Yeah, I would also add some fresh soil too. I would really work my soil. You know, and I had very good success. But again, we're talking pots. It's a whole different world. When you use garden soil, it compacts after the first 3 or 4 days of watering, and it starts choking out your root system. That's basically the difference between pot and mix. I know a lot of people think it's what's in the soil, meaning fertilizer-wise, but what's in the soil is not going to last. You know, unless if you're in an area where, you know, soil's just so rich and it's in the ground, so it's, you know, you got drainage coming from all over the place. You're going to have to add something to pots. It just doesn't work if you don't, especially when you're growing monsters. You know, maybe your little dwarfs can get away with it, but you don't understand. Like, these actually, I guess, look kind of sorry right now. But again, this is September 15th. You should have seen what these looked like earlier in the year. I wish I would have better documented it, but I've been busy. And I didn't know that this was going to work so well. And I want to get this video out because even though I'm going to do it next year, if somebody sees it, I want them to be ready to go next year. So, expert potting mix. 2 cubic feet. And you know what? It doesn't go a long way. I would say you probably get 2 or 3 pots out of 1 bag. And then you have to have extra bags. For 2 reasons, okay? The first reason And you could tell I've done this not too long ago. As the plants grow, the soil sucks down. So every 2 weeks, especially when they're rapid growing, you got to keep adding soil up to whatever line you designate as your high line, okay? And then the second reason, and this is what I'm going to change next year, you really don't want to pack your soil up to the top like this and put your plant in. When you got your seedlings or your little plants and they're small, you want to only put like maybe 4 inches of soil, plant your plant, and then as it grows, add your soil. Because as soon as soil touches anywhere on the plant, it's going to make roots come out. And let me show you. I actually had one that I tested that. I put a big mound of soil around it recently and then removed it because I wanted to make this video. But see all these that were starting? And that's where you get your strong root system, especially pots where they want to get flimsy when they start getting bigger. You want that root system really strong. So, you know, plant it deep as a baby and then keep adding it. The only pain with what I just said is I also mentioned that I'm going to use those biodegradable pots so I can bring them inside more easily. So I guess it's going to depend on what size they get in those little pots. But I guess when you do finally transplant them, you're going to put the pot almost on the bottom and then start adding your soil. Hopefully I explained that right. If not, I'm going to be more detailed in showing it next year. You can see that's already starting to dissolve, that calcium, phosphorus. I didn't do that one yet. But that stuff generally will dissolve if it sits on the soil. I've tried other things. I tried pre-dissolving it in water so that I could mix it in with my fertilizer mixer, and that wasn't very successful. It literally takes about a good 10 minutes to get that to dissolve in water. For some reason, it actually does quicker in the pots. I even tried crushing it up, which, by the way, my wife helped me, and it burns your fingers, so that I could measure out scoops and directly put it in the water that way. But I just found that that's probably the best way right there. At least as of right now, with what I've experimented with. Back to the potting soil. I know what you're thinking. Oh, you're not showing me the... Yeah, I know. I'm unscripted. As I always say on my channel, it's guerrilla warfare. I'm non-for-profit. I'm just basically trying to help people out, and if YouTube gives me a few bucks in the meantime, that's just gas money, you know. I'm not going to make a living off YouTube. I have a real job. But at any rate, here's your UPC. But that's what I recommend that you go with. So my wife likes to grow avocado plants. This is about a 6-foot one. It's about 2 years. They made it through last summer. We brought it in, put it by a window all winter, and then put it back out. It's doing pretty good. I've been using the same mixture, at least this year. But what I wanted to show you, I didn't wet the soil down yet. This plant doesn't like to be quite as saturated, so we keep it a little moist, a little less moist. Correction on that. But you can kind of get an idea of the kind of soil. See how it's kind of chunky and it's got a lot more solids in there. It keeps the drainage a lot better and it keeps it from packing down. Hopefully you can kind of see that okay. But that's kind of what you're looking for. Very similar to making homemade compost in a way. But if you'd like to see a video on avocados, let me know. That's my wife's department. Wanted to show you something real quick on pots. Okay, here's what I wanted to show you. Now, my channel is primarily a mechanic channel. As I have time, I want to expand it with other things that I think are interesting and helpful. But I rent out a 15 by 14 foot shop, and my landlord just so happens to also have a farm. outside his office, every few months or so, he sells these big containers. And what these are, and I know you farmers are laughing because you already know, this is for animal feed, okay? And usually farmers that have cattle and stuff, they buy this stuff on a pallet with probably, what, 27 of them on a pallet all stacked up 3 by 3 by 3. But this is a good size pot. Those, you know, you could tell by the basketballs. Now he sells them for $5 a piece because otherwise he would just throw them out. I said, hey, that's perfect for the kids' basketballs, you know. But I wouldn't mind getting 10 of those, 8 or 10 of those. And then you're kind of hitting 2 birds with 1 stone, you know, because even though your pots, you're getting into that enough soil that it's almost like having it in the ground, and it's going to retain more nutrients, and more importantly, you're going to have a better root system because there's more scavenging areas for the roots to go. So even though if you're in Arkansas, you could find these easily, but that's pretty universal. I would say start talking to your farmers, start hanging around your feed supply shops, you know, on the outskirts of town where all your country folk are going to get animal feed. Talk to these guys. Ask them if, you know, if you could have their old containers. If they get a little weird about it, offer them a little bit of money. But next year, I think I'm going to go ahead and buy 10 of those. This year, he had them. They were $5 a piece. He put them out. I didn't really have the money. I bought one. I went back 3 days later on payday, and they were all gone. So I actually talked to them, and I'm on a list to get 10 of them. But yeah, I just wanted to give that as an idea because it's really hard to find large pots. Not to mention, they're expensive when you do find them. So you got to look for, you know, cheaper ways to do things. And I mean, that's a monster. I'll put my foot by it. You know, drill a couple of holes around the perimeter about 2 inches from the bottom, and you got a perfect tomato planter, excuse me, with the exception of you're going to be buying a lot of soil. At that point, it may not hurt to add a little bit of ground soil or compost or something to keep the costs down. Okay, so I shot this video about an hour ago and I started editing, and I remembered I needed to cover sun. This is especially true in the south. If you're in the north, give them full blast sun, the best full blast sun you can. But here's what I've learned in the south, okay? Now, right now, my sun is coming in right there, and it's about noon, okay? These don't start getting somewhat full sun until noon because I have the trees, and in the morning it's shaded by the mobile home, okay? Now, depending on how things are, sometimes more light will get in there. But what it is the sun's intense enough in the south, they're going to get plenty of light, okay? And then in the afternoon, the sun will be over there, and they get a little bit, maybe 45 minutes or so of high afternoon sun that comes in. But they're not getting scorched all day. Basically, if you go around my house to that front corner, that's where they get it all morning, and they get it up until, well, that sun right there will still hit that corner. I'd say up till about 2 o'clock they get full sun. And I've tested that spot, and it works really, really well before it gets too hot. So what I basically do is I start them. I put them in that corner where they're getting much more full blast sunlight. And then what I do is, you know, probably come mid-July, well, I said mid-July, mid-June, whenever it starts getting really, really hot, like when it's above, I'd say 80, 85 consistently, try to get them where they're getting a little bit of shade, because I'm telling you, they like to scorch out. You know, down here when they do the determinants, by the time that heat hits, they've already had their one harvest, and the plants start dying off and they stop watering them. But if you're trying to make them go until the first frost in fall, I recommend trying to figure out something like that. You know, if you're like in Laredo, Texas, and you don't have trees, that might be an issue. You may have to, you know, build like a 12-foot picket fence that's 20 feet long or something. You may have to get creative, but try to figure out a way to shade them out. Really, if you had the time, you could even do like a little canopy system, build something out of PVC or 2x4s, where, you know, maybe come 1 o'clock, you could roll down a cover, like similar to what you would see on like a greenhouse, you know, that plastic side cover. But I'm just telling you, that's one of the other tricks, and the one trick that might be hard for you to duplicate. But as you can see, as the sun moves and as it finds different cracks and crevices in my tree line, certain areas get the sun, but it just generally stays cooler in this area, and that's contributed a lot. Pest control. What tomato video would be complete without talking about it? I did really well on pests this season. Didn't spray, didn't do a whole lot of anything until just the other day. Now I know some of you with a keen eye know what's going on with those branches. I know you do. If you've grown tomatoes before, you've had it happen before. And a little bit right there. Which fortunately my plants are still healthy. As you can see, I got a nice cluster right in here. But yeah, it was a tomato hornworm. Hate hornworms. Let me slide a picture in of them. I had to literally snip it off the whole branch because he was gripped on there. I found a good video for counteracting hornworms. I believe the guy used neat oil and cups. I'm going to splice it in here if I can find it. But otherwise, not a whole lot to report for pests this year. Sorry if the video is kind of long. I didn't want to leave anything out. But otherwise, if you find this interesting and you want to see what happens, stay tuned. You know, maybe next year I end up burning some of the plants out. Maybe I do even better. I know early on in the year I had the soil packed a little bit too tight. And I loosened it a little bit. And then that seemed to help a lot. So next year I'll literally go step by step. So that if, you know, you don't have a green thumb and you're new or you're young or whatever, you can watch my video and do exactly like I do. I know there's a lot of people on here that'll watch this and, oh, too much information, too long of a video. Oh, I already knew that. My job's not to cater to you. It's to cater to everybody. You know, I want to try to be detail orientated. And if there's one detail out there that only one person in all of YouTube land didn't know and now they know, it made it all worth it. So that's my video. Now I gotta finish filling these up, and then I'm gonna go over soil and splice that into my B-roll, and that's it. Thanks for watching.